Commander Jack Harrison stared at the screen in his command center on Earth. Defense Station Titan's Gate? The message had come from deep space, farther than any human signal had ever traveled. The transmission played again and again, each time, making his stomach feel worse. Strange symbols filled the screen while harsh alien voices spoke in clicks and hisses. The computer had worked for hours to translate the message, but when it finished, Jack wished it had never started. The aliens called themselves the Zorvak Dominion. They said they ruled over 300 different worlds and had conquered every species they had ever met. Now they wanted Earth. The message was simple and cold. Humans had 3 days to surrender or they would all die. Jack rubbed his tired eyes and called Fleet Admiral Lisa Carter. Lisa arrived at the station within hours. She was tall and strong, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Behind her came Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the best scientist Earth had for studying alien life. Elena was young but smart, always asking questions that made others think harder. Together they watched the alien message again. The transmission showed pictures of dead worlds and broken cities. Entire civilizations had tried to fight the Zorvek and lost. Some planets were now empty rocks floating in space. Others had become slave worlds where the survivors worked in mines and factories. The aliens made it clear that humans would get the same choice every other species had received. Become slaves or become nothing at all. Lisa shook her head as she studied the alien ships in the transmission. They were huge, bigger than anything humans had ever built. Their weapons could destroy cities with single shots. Their shields could stop any weapon Earth possessed. The Zorvak had technology that was hundreds of years ahead of human science. Fighting them seemed like throwing rocks at a mountain. 3 alien ships appeared at the edge of the solar system the next day. They moved slowly toward Earth, taking their time. They wanted humans to see them coming and feel afraid. Captain Ryan Torres took his battleship out to meet them. His ship was Earth's newest and strongest, but it looked like a toy next to the alien vessels. The aliens agreed to meet on a small moon near Jupiter. High Commander Thexfer led the Zorvik delegation. He was 8 feet tall with 4 arms and a face like an insect. His skin was hard and black, and his eyes were yellow with no emotion in them at all. When he spoke through his translator, his voice sounded like grinding metal. Lisa tried to negotiate. She offered trade agreements and friendship between their species. She promised that humans would share their art and culture with the Zorvak. She even offered to give them some human territory if they would leave Earth alone. Thexfer listened to every word without moving or changing expression. When Lisa finished talking, the alien commander stood up. He was so tall that he made all the humans look like children. He told them that humans were weak and stupid, just like every other species the Zorvak had found. He said that fighting was useless because no one had ever defeated the Dominion. 300 worlds had tried and 300 worlds had failed. Elena watched the alien carefully during the meeting. She noticed things that others missed. The way Thexfer moved was stiff and mechanical. He never seemed surprised by anything. Lisa said as if he had heard the same words from hundreds of other species. His responses sounded like he was reading from a script he had memorized long ago to prove their power. The aliens destroyed the largest mining colony on Mars. 1 ship fired 1 shot and 10,000 people died in seconds. The blast was so powerful that it cracked the planet's surface. The message was clear. This could happen to Earth just as easily. Captain Torres watched the destruction from his ship. His hands shook with anger as he saw the colony turn to fire and dust. The miners had been good people with families waiting for them to come home. Now they were gone forever, killed to make a point to humans who already knew they were outmatched. The alien ships left after the demonstration. They returned to the edge of the solar system to wait. Thexfer's final words echoed in everyone's mind. Humans had 72 hours to decide. They could surrender and live as slaves, or they could fight and die as heroes. The choice seemed simple to the aliens because they had seen it made so many times before. Back on Earth, emergency meetings started immediately. World leaders argued about what to do. Some wanted to surrender right away to save lives. Others wanted to fight even if it meant everyone would die. The debate went on for hours while the alien deadline came closer and closer. Elena studied the recordings of Vexver over and over. Something about the alien bothered her, but she could not figure out what it was. She watched how he moved and spoke, looking for any weakness or clue that might help humanity survive. As she worked, she began to form an idea that would change everything. President Catherine Walsh stood before the cameras knowing that her next words would decide the fate of all humanity. The whole world watched as she prepared to give Earth's answer to the Zorvak ultimatum. Behind her stood the military leaders and scientists who had debated for 3 days straight. They were tired and scared, but they had made their choice. Catherine looked directly into the camera and spoke with a steady voice. She said that humanity had heard the alien demands and understood the consequences. She talked about the destroyed colony on Mars and the threat hanging over Earth. Then she said the words that shocked the galaxy: humans would fight. They would not surrender, and they would not become slaves. Earth chose war. The transmission went out to every human settlement in space. It reached the colonies on Luna and the mining stations in the asteroid belt. It traveled to the research outposts near Saturn and the exploration ships heading to other star systems. Everywhere humans lived, they heard the same message. Their homeworld had chosen to fight an impossible war rather than accept defeat. Hi. Commander Vexver received Earth's response on his flagship. He stared at the human transmission for several minutes without moving. His officers waited for orders, confused by their commander's silence. Finally, Vexver spoke to his second in command. He said that humans were even more foolish than he had thought. No species had ever chosen death over slavery when faced with the Dominion's power. General Marcus Webb began preparing Earth's defenses immediately after the president's speech. He knew they could not win a straight fight against the Zorvak ships, so he planned something different. Human forces would use speed and surprise instead of raw power. They would hit hard and fast, then disappear before the aliens could respond. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only chance they had. Dr. Benjamin Clark worked with Elena to study the alien technology they had seen. The recordings from the meeting with Vexver showed details of Zorvak equipment and weapons. Elena's observations about the alien commander's behavior gave them new ideas about how the enemy might think and fight. She noticed that the Zorvak seemed to follow patterns and procedures that never changed. Captain Torres prepared his ship for the first battle. The Defiance was fast and well-armed, but it was still no match for a Zorvak cruiser in direct combat. Torres studied every detail of the alien ships, looking for weak spots or design flaws. His crew trained day and night, knowing that their lives and the future of Earth depended on their performance. Admiral Sam Mitchell took command of the combined Earth fleet. He had ships from every nation and colony, all working together for the first time in human history. The fleet was small compared to what the Zorvak could bring, but it represented the best humanity had to offer. Mitchell knew his people were scared, but he also saw determination in their eyes that gave him hope. The first alien attack came without warning. Zorvak ships appeared throughout the solar system, striking at human outposts and settlements. Their strategy was simple and brutal. They would destroy everything humans had built until Earth surrendered or died. The aliens had used this approach on hundreds of other worlds, and it had never failed, but the human response surprised them. Instead of trying to protect every target, Earth's forces struck back at the Zorvak ships themselves. Captain Torres led a squadron of fast attack craft against an alien cruiser near Jupiter. They used the planet's radiation and magnetic fields to hide their approach, something the Zorvak had not expected. The human ships attacked from multiple directions at once, confusing the alien targeting systems. Torres aimed for what looked like sensor arrays and weapon ports on the enemy vessel. His guns could not penetrate the ship's main armor, but they damaged external equipment and disrupted alien communications. For the first time in centuries, a Zorvak ship was forced to retreat from battle. Elena watched the battle recordings with growing excitement. The aliens fought exactly like she had predicted. They followed set procedures and responded to attacks. in predictable ways. When humans did something unexpected, the Zorvak seemed confused and slow to adapt. This gave her an idea that could change the war. She gathered the research team and shared her theory. The Zorvak Dominion had conquered so many worlds that they had become overconfident. They expected every enemy to fight in the same way, using the same tactics and strategies. When humans did something different, the aliens did not know how to respond quickly. Dr. Clark began developing new weapons based on Elena's insights. Instead of trying to match Zorvak technology, he focused on creating unpredictable systems that could confuse and surprise the enemy. His team worked with salvage from the damaged alien cruiser, learning how their shields and sensors operated. Meanwhile, reports came in from human settlements throughout the system. The Zorvak were destroying everything they found, but they were also taking heavy damage from human counterattacks. The aliens had expected to crush human resistance in a few days, but the war was already lasting longer than they had planned. Dexver studied the battle reports on his command ship. His forces were winning, but not as easily as he had expected. Human tactics made no sense to him. They attacked targets that seemed worthless and ignored objectives that any civilized species would defend. Their behavior was chaotic and unpredictable, unlike anything in the Dominion's vast military database. President Walsh addressed the nation again as the first week of war ended. She spoke to a world under attack, with cities burning and millions of people in shelters. But her voice was still strong, and her message was clear. Humanity would continue to fight no matter what happened. They had chosen their path and would see it through to the end. The Battle of Jupiter's orbital platforms began at dawn on the 15th day of the war. Commander Harrison coordinated the defense from his command center while Admiral Carter led the fleet into combat. The Zorvak had brought their heaviest ships for this attack, planning to crush human resistance once and for all. They expected the battle to last a few hours at most. Harrison watched his tactical display as enemy ships closed in on the defense platforms. Each platform held thousands of people and enough firepower to defend a small planet. But the Zorvak fleet was massive, with ships that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. The aliens moved in perfect formation, their advance slow and unstoppable. Like a metal tide, Admiral Carter split her forces into 3 groups that attacked from different angles. She had learned from Captain Torres that direct confrontation was suicide against Zorvak technology. Instead, her ships darted in and out like angry wasps, striking at the enemy fleet's edges and flanks. The tactic was working, but human losses were still terrible. The first platform fell after 2 hours of fighting. Its shields collapsed under alien bombardment, and secondary explosions tore the structure apart. Harrison watched 3,000 people die in seconds, their emergency pods scattered like leaves in a hurricane. But even as the platform died, its final shots damaged 2 Zorvak cruisers badly enough to force them out of the battle. Dr. Clark's new weapons appeared in combat for the first time during the Jupiter battle. His team had created missiles that changed course randomly, making them almost impossible for alien defense systems to predict. The warheads were smaller than standard human weapons, but they carried special payloads designed to disrupt Zorvak electronics and sensors. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster commanded the platform's defense systems. She was an engineer who had learned to fight during the first week of war. Foster watched the alien attack patterns and noticed something important. The Zorvak ships always approached targets from the same angles and used identical firing sequences. She began adjusting her defenses to take advantage of this predictability. Captain Torres led a desperate attack on the Zorvak flagship with his squadron of fast ships. The alien vessel was 10 times larger than the Defiance, but Torres had studied its design for weeks. He knew where the shield generators were located and which weapon ports had limited firing arcs. His plan was crazy, but it might work if his pilots were brave enough to follow him. The squadron dove toward the flagship's lower hull, using the ship's own bulk to shield them from most of its weapons. Torres fired everything he had at a single point on the enemy vessel's armor. The shots barely scratched the alien hull, but they served as a distraction while his pilots positioned themselves around the ship's blind spots. Elena Rodriguez had joined the defense team to observe alien behavior during combat. She watched the battle through the platform's sensors, taking notes on how the Zorvak responded to different human tactics. What she saw confirmed her theories about alien psychology. The Zorvak were brilliant fighters when facing conventional enemies, but they struggled against chaos and unpredictability. The second platform's destruction came as a shock to both sides. A Zorvak heavy cruiser had been badly damaged by human fighters and was limping away from the battle. But instead of retreating to safety, the alien ship suddenly changed course and crashed into the platform at full speed. The collision destroyed both vessels in a massive explosion that lit up the Jovian sky. Harrison could not understand why the aliens had sacrificed their ship. The tactical situation did not require such a desperate move. Elena suggested that the alien commander had been following emergency protocols that did not account for the unique conditions of fighting humans. The Zorvak response had been automatic rather than strategic. Foster noticed that some alien ships were having trouble with their formations after several hours of combat. The perfect coordination that made Zorvak fleets so deadly was breaking down as individual ships suffered damage to their communication systems. Dr. Clark's disruptor missiles were working better than anyone had hoped. Admiral Carter saw the opportunity and ordered a concentrated attack on the alien command vessels. If the human fleet could disrupt Zorvak communications further, the enemy formation might collapse completely. It was a long shot, but Carter had learned that long shots were humanity's best hope for survival. Torres and his pilots pressed their attack on the flagship, despite impossible odds. Half his squadron was already gone, destroyed by alien point defense weapons or crushed by gravitational fields. But the survivors kept fighting, their ships dancing around the massive enemy vessel like insects attacking a giant. Their weapons were too small to cause serious damage, but they were making the aliens angry. The breakthrough came when Foster discovered a pattern in the Zorvak shield frequencies. The aliens rotated their defensive screens in a regular cycle that could be predicted and exploited. She passed this information to the remaining platforms and fleet units, giving human gunners a few seconds of vulnerability to target during each cycle. The tide of battle began to turn as human forces adapted their tactics in real time. Zorvak commanders found themselves facing enemies who changed their approach every few minutes. Formations that had worked for centuries against other species were useless against humans who refused to fight according to established rules. Elena watched. A damaged Zorvak cruiser spinning out of control after its command section was destroyed by a lucky shot from the third platform. The alien crew was probably trying to regain control using backup systems, but their response was taking too long. Human ships swarmed the crippled vessel, finishing it off before it could recover. The battle ended after 8 hours of continuous fighting. 2 of the 3 platforms were destroyed, and Admiral Carter had lost half her fleet. But the Zorvak had also paid a terrible price. 7 alien ships were completely destroyed, and many others were too damaged to continue fighting. For the first time since the war began, a Zorvak fleet had been forced to retreat. Harrison stood in his damaged command center, looking at the casualty reports. Thousands of people had died defending Jupiter, but their sacrifice had proven something important. Humans could hurt the Zorvak Dominion if they were willing to fight smart and die hard. The aliens were not invincible after all. 6 months after the first Zorvak message arrived, humanity had learned to fight like no species before them. The war had changed both sides in ways neither had expected. Human tactics evolved daily while alien strategies remained frozen in patterns that had worked for 1,000 years. This difference would decide the fate of the galaxy at the Battle of Titan. Admiral Mitchell commanded the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. Ships from every colony and settlement had joined together, their crews united by shared purpose and desperate hope. The fleet included vessels built with hybrid technology that Dr. Clark's team had developed from captured alien equipment. These ships were still smaller than Zorvak vessels, but they were faster and much harder to predict. The battle began when Zorvak reinforcements arrived from their nearest base. High Commander HFY led 43 ships against Mitchell's 37, confident that superior firepower would crush human resistance. The alien fleet moved in perfect formation, their advance as precise as clockwork. HFY had fought hundreds of battles exactly like this one, but humanity's response shattered every assumption the aliens had made. Instead of forming defensive lines or protecting key positions, the human fleet scattered in all directions. Some ships dove toward Titan's atmosphere while others climbed high above the orbital plane. A few vessels even shut down their engines completely and drifted like space debris. Mitchell had studied every recorded Zorvak battle, looking for patterns that could be exploited. He discovered that alien commanders always responded to specific human actions in predictable ways. If humans appeared to retreat, the Zorvak would pursue in standard formation. If humans concentrated their forces, the aliens would try to surround them using established tactics. Captain Torres, now promoted to Rear Admiral, led the most dangerous part of Mitchell's plan. His task force would appear to be fleeing toward the outer system, drawing the main Zorvak fleet away from Titan. Once the aliens were committed to the pursuit, Torres would turn and fight while other human forces attacked from behind and below. The first phase worked perfectly. The HFY took the bait and ordered 30 ships to chase Torres while keeping the rest to guard important positions. The alien commander followed procedures that had been successful for centuries, never considering that humans might be deliberately manipulating his responses. The Zorvak formation stretched out across millions of miles as they hunted their fleeing prey. Elena Rodriguez watched the battle from Mitchell's flagship, analyzing alien behavior patterns in real time. She had developed new ways to predict Zorvak tactics by studying their rigid command structure. When human actions triggered specific alien responses, Elena could forecast what the enemy would do next with remarkable accuracy. Her insights were passed to human commanders instantly. Dr. Clark's hybrid weapons performed beyond all expectations during the battle. Human ships fired missiles that split into smaller warheads just before impact, overwhelming alien defense systems. Energy weapons combined human focusing techniques with Zorvak power sources, creating beams that could penetrate enemy shields. Most importantly, these new systems were unpredictable enough to confuse alien targeting computers. The second phase began when Torres suddenly reversed course and attacked his pursuers head-on. The Zorvak commanders expected him to keep running or perhaps make a desperate last stand. Instead, Torres split his force into 5 groups that surrounded the alien fleet from every direction. The humans attacked simultaneously, creating chaos. In the normally disciplined Zorvak formation, Colonel Janet Price had trained her Marines for a different kind of mission. While the space battle raged, she led assault teams against Zorvak-held installations on Titan's surface. Human ground forces had been preparing for months, studying alien equipment and tactics. Price planned to prove that humans could fight. The Zorvak anywhere, even on solid ground. The Marine assault began with orbital bombardment from human ships. But instead of trying to destroy the alien bases completely, the attack was designed to confuse and isolate enemy forces. Price knew that Zorvak ground troops followed the same rigid patterns as their fleet commanders. If she could disrupt their communications and supply lines, the aliens would struggle to coordinate their defense. Mitchell's main attack came from an unexpected direction. While the Zorvak fleet was stretched out chasing Torres, human ships emerged from Titan's upper atmosphere, where they had been hiding. The aliens had never seen atmospheric hiding tactics before and had no protocols for dealing with such an approach. Their sensors had dismissed the human ships as sensor ghosts or debris. The surprise was complete. Human vessels struck at the Zorvak fleet's center while Torres attacked from the front and other forces hit the flanks. For the first time in Dominion history, their formation broke apart under enemy pressure. Individual alien ships found themselves isolated and outnumbered, facing human tactics they had never encountered. HFY watched his fleet disintegrate with growing horror. His perfect formations were scattered across the battlefield, his ships destroyed or fleeing in disorder. The humans were fighting like nothing he had ever seen, using strategies that defied every principle of civilized warfare. Worse, they were winning. crisis, Marines achieved their objectives with surgical precision. They captured alien equipment and prisoners while destroying key installations that supported the Zorvak fleet. The colonel had trained her troops to think independently rather than follow rigid orders. When situations changed, Marines adapted instantly without waiting for new commands from headquarters. Elena's analysis of captured alien prisoners revealed something crucial about Zorvak psychology. The aliens had conquered so many worlds that they could not imagine losing a war. Their entire society was built around the idea of inevitable victory. When faced with unexpected defeat, many Zorvak soldiers simply stopped fighting rather than adapt to new circumstances. The Battle of Titan ended with humanity's first major victory. 18 Zorvak ships were destroyed or captured, while others fled back to their base with tales of human tactics that seemed impossible. Mitchell's fleet had suffered losses too, but for the first time since the war began, humans had won a battle through superior strategy. Rather than lucky desperation, news of the victory spread throughout human space within hours. Colonies that had been preparing for certain death suddenly had hope again. The Zorvak Dominion could be beaten if humans were willing to keep fighting and learning. But the real impact of Titan would be felt far beyond human space, in places where other species had been slaves for generations. The first message arrived 3 weeks after the Battle of Titan. It came from a star system 47 light-years away, transmitted on frequencies that only the most advanced alien technology could produce. The message was in broken human language, learned from intercepted Earth broadcasts. It said simply that the Cathani people had heard about human victories and wanted to fight. Alongside them against the Zorvak Dominion, Admiral Torres, now commanding humanity's fastest ships, led the first contact mission to Cathani space. His diplomatic skills had been learned through combat rather than classroom study, but they proved surprisingly effective with alien minds shaped by centuries of oppression. The Cathani were tall, thin beings with silver skin and large eyes that reflected their inner sadness. They had been slaves for over 200 years. The Cathani leaders met Torres on a hidden asteroid base that had somehow escaped Zorvak detection. Their spokesman was named Silver, who remembers freedom, one of the few beings old enough to recall life before the Dominion came. He spoke of watching his world burn and his people taken in chains to work in alien mines and factories across dozens of star systems. Torres learned that the Cathani had been planning rebellion for decades but had never found the courage to act. The Zorvak seemed too powerful, their technology too advanced, their fleets too large to defeat. But news of human victories had changed everything. If a young species like humanity could hurt the Dominion, perhaps freedom was possible after all. Within days, other messages began arriving from across the galaxy. The crystalline Zephyr beings sent mathematical equations that translated into offers of alliance. The aquatic Murdoch transmitted songs that their poets had written about human courage. Species that had been silent for centuries suddenly found their voices again. Commander Jake Sullivan led humanity's new stealth ships on missions deep into Zorvak territory. His vessels were built using hybrid technology that combined human creativity with captured alien systems. They could slip past enemy sensors and strike at targets that the Dominion thought were completely safe. Sullivan's attacks were small but perfectly timed to support rebellions throughout the galaxy. The coordinated uprising began on 12 worlds simultaneously. Cathani workers sabotaged mining equipment while Zephyr beings used their natural abilities to disrupt alien computer networks. On every world, the pattern was the same. Years of careful preparation combined with human tactical advice to create chaos that the Zorvak could not control. Elena Rodriguez had become humanity's expert on alien psychology and rebellion tactics. She worked with representatives from 17 different species, learning their strengths and how they could be used against the Dominion. Each species had unique abilities that the Zorvak had tried to suppress. Elena helped them remember what they could accomplish when they fought together. The Zorvak response to the rebellions revealed something important about their empire. High Commander Thexfer and his fellow commanders had no experience with coordinated resistance from multiple species. Their standard procedure was to crush each rebellion with overwhelming force, but they could not be everywhere at once. For the first time in Dominion history, they faced an enemy that was too large and too scattered to defeat quickly. Torres found himself in the strange position of becoming a galactic diplomat. His meetings with alien leaders required careful translation and cultural sensitivity that he had never needed in combat. But his reputation as the human who had bloodied the Zorvak fleet made him welcome in places where Earth's official ambassadors would not have been trusted. The rebellion on Cathani Prime became a symbol of hope throughout the galaxy. Silverhor remembers freedom, led his people in an uprising that lasted 6 days and freed millions of slaves. The old Cathani proved that age and suffering had not broken his spirit. When Zorvak reinforcements arrived, they found empty slave quarters and abandoned factories. The people had vanished into hiding places prepared over decades. Sullivan's stealth attacks created confusion throughout Zorvak command networks. His ships would appear without warning, destroy key installations, and disappear before enemy forces could respond. The aliens began to fear that humans had developed some kind of invisibility technology. In reality, Sullivan was simply using tactics that the Dominion had never encountered before. Dr. Clark worked with alien scientists to develop new weapons that combined technologies from multiple species. Cathani metallurgy made human ships stronger, while Zephyr Electronics improved targeting systems. Each alliance brought new capabilities that multiplied humanity's effectiveness against their common enemy. The galaxy was learning to fight as one. The Murda contributed something unexpected to the rebellion. Their homeworld was mostly ocean, and they had developed underwater cities that were invisible to orbital sensors. These hidden bases became staging areas for raids against Zorvak shipping lanes. Alien cargo vessels began disappearing throughout the galaxy as aquatic forces struck from below. Elena's analysis of Dominion records revealed the truth about Zorvak expansion. The aliens had not conquered 300 worlds through superior strategy or brilliant leadership. They had simply used overwhelming technology against species that fought alone and unprepared. When faced with coordinated resistance from multiple enemies, their ancient empire began to crack. President Walsh addressed not just humanity, but the entire galaxy in a broadcast that reached every rebel stronghold. She spoke of freedom and dignity, of the right of all thinking beings to choose their own destiny. Her words were translated into dozens of languages and broadcast from hidden transmitters on 100 worlds. The Zorvak tried to jam the signals but could not silence them all. Thexfer stood in his command center watching reports flood in from across the Dominion. Rebellions were spreading faster than his forces could respond. Entire sectors were falling out of contact as their communication networks failed. The humans had done something impossible. They had taught the galaxy to fight back. The old alien commander felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Fear, not fear of death in battle, which any warrior could face, but fear that everything he believed about Zorvak's superiority might be wrong. If the Dominion could fall, if 300 conquered worlds could break free, then his entire life had been built on lies. Torres received a message that changed the war forever. It came from the Dominion's core worlds, transmitted by a species that had been enslaved for over 500 years. The message was simple but devastating. The rebels had found the location of the Zorvak capital system. After centuries of secrecy, the heart of the enemy empire was finally within reach. The final battle for freedom began at the edge of the Zorvak capital system. Admiral Carter commanded the largest fleet in galactic history, with ships from 43 different species united under a single purpose. Human vessels flew alongside Cathani cruisers and Zephyr crystal ships. The Murdak had even brought their ocean cities converted into mobile battle platforms. Never before had so many species fought together as equals. The Zorvak Dominion had pulled back their scattered forces to defend their homeworld. Thexfer commanded over 200 ships, the largest fleet the aliens had assembled in centuries. Their formation was perfect, their discipline absolute. their technology still superior to anything the rebels possessed. But the old commander knew that perfection and discipline had not been enough to stop the human plague that was destroying his empire. Carter's strategy was unlike anything seen in the long history of galactic warfare. Instead of one massive assault, the rebel fleet attacked in waves that came from every direction. Each wave used different tactics and targeted different objectives. The Zorvak found themselves fighting 17 separate battles at the same time, each requiring different responses and adaptations. President Walsh stood beside Carter on the flagship's bridge, representing not just humanity but all free peoples of the galaxy. Her presence was symbolic, but it meant everything to the beings who had spent lifetimes in slavery. The woman who had chosen war over surrender was here to witness the final confrontation between freedom and tyranny. Elena Rodriguez coordinated with alien specialists to predict Zorvak responses to each phase of the battle. Her understanding of enemy psychology had become legendary throughout Rebel space. She could anticipate alien tactics with uncanny accuracy, allowing Carter to position her forces perfectly to counter every Dominion move. The rigid thinking that made the Zorvak efficient also made them predictable. The first wave consisted entirely of Cathani ships attacking the enemy fleet's left flank. Their vessels were fast and maneuverable, designed for hit-and-run tactics that had been perfected during 2 centuries of hidden resistance. The Cathani struck hard and vanished into the system's asteroid fields, drawing Zorvak pursuit ships. Away from the main formation, Torres led the second wave in a direct assault on the enemy center. His human task force used every dirty trick that had been developed during years of desperate fighting. Ships that appeared damaged suddenly revealed hidden weapons. Vessels that seemed to be retreating turned and attacked from unexpected angles. The Zorvak formation began to stretch and bend under pressure from enemies that refused to follow any recognizable pattern. Commander Sullivan's stealth ships had infiltrated the system days earlier, hiding in the shadows of moons and asteroids. When the battle began, they struck at Zorvak supply vessels and communication relays. The aliens found their perfect coordination disrupted as orders failed to reach distant ships and ammunition supplies were cut off. For the first time in Dominion history, their fleet began to operate in confusion. The Zephyr contributed their unique abilities to the third wave. Their crystalline ships could manipulate electromagnetic fields in ways that confused Zorvak sensors and targeting systems. Enemy weapons that should have hit their targets instead fired wild shots into empty space. The mathematical precision that made Zephyr minds valuable to the Dominion was now turned against their former masters. Dr. Clark's hybrid weapons proved decisive in the battle's fourth phase. Human creativity combined with alien technology had produced systems that the Zorvak could not predict or counter. Missiles that changed their targeting in flight struck ships that thought they were safe. Energy beams that bent around obstacles found weak points in enemy defenses. Each shot taught the rebels something new about their foes. Dexfer watched his fleet disintegrate with the cold realization that his empire was dying. The rebels fought with a coordination and adaptability that defied everything he understood about warfare. They learned from each exchange, modified their tactics in real time, and supported each other with a unity that the Dominion had never achieved despite centuries of forced cooperation. The breakthrough came when Murdoch forces emerged from the system's outer gas giant. Their ocean cities had been hidden in the planet's methane atmosphere, invisible to Zorvak sensors that were designed to detect conventional ships. The aquatic beings brought massive vessels that could absorb enormous amounts of damage, while delivering devastating firepower at close range. Colonel Price led marine assaults on crippled Zorvak vessels throughout the battle. Her troops included soldiers from a dozen different species, all trained in human tactics of independent thinking and rapid adaptation. They boarded enemy ships and fought their way to command centers, capturing vital intelligence and preventing damaged vessels from self-destructing. Elena's final psychological insight proved to be the key that unlocked Zorvak defeat. She realized that the aliens could not comprehend fighting an enemy that included their former slaves. The Dominion's entire worldview was based on the idea that conquered species were inferior and would never challenge their masters. When faced with rebellion from beings they considered broken, many Zorvak simply could not process what was happening. The tide turned decisively when 3 Zorvak heavy cruisers surrendered rather than fight to destruction. Their commanders had concluded that resistance was futile, the same words they had used to crush hope on hundreds of worlds. The irony was lost on the aliens, but every rebel in the fleet understood its significance. The hunters had become the hunted. HFY's flagship came under direct assault from Admiral Torres and a combined human Cathani task force. The old commander had expected to die in glorious battle, maintaining Dominion honor to the end. Instead, he found himself facing enemies who offered surrender terms and treated prisoners with dignity. The concept of mercy from inferior species was something his mind could barely grasp. President Walsh delivered the final ultimatum to the Zorvak leadership. Using their own words from that first message to Earth, the Dominion had 3 hours to surrender unconditionally or face total destruction. The choice was the same one that had been offered to hundreds of species over the centuries. But this time, it was the conquerors who had to decide between submission and death. The Zorvak Dominion officially surrendered when HFY transmitted his fleet's capitulation to all remaining alien forces. The broadcast went out across the galaxy, reaching every world where the rebellion had taken hold. After over 1,000 years of expansion and conquest, the greatest empire in galactic history had fallen to species it had considered beneath. Notice. Torres accepted the surrender aboard the Zorvak flagship, standing in the same chamber where HFY had once dictated terms to countless other species. The symbolism was perfect and deliberate. The beings who had been offered only slavery or death were now offering their former masters the chance to live in freedom. 5 years later, President Walsh stood before the first Galactic Democratic Council, representing humanity in a government that included every free species in known space. The galaxy was rebuilding from centuries of oppression, learning to cooperate rather than dominate. It was not perfect, and there were many problems still to solve. But it was free. Elena's final report on the war concluded that the Zorvak had been defeated not by superior technology or greater numbers, but by something they had systematically destroyed in every species they conquered. The willingness to fight when victory seemed impossible, to adapt when old methods failed, and to unite with others despite differences in appearance or culture. These qualities had made humanity dangerous to an empire built on despair. The lesson echoed throughout the galaxy in the songs of free peoples and the textbooks of liberated schools. Never underestimate a species that chooses hope over surrender, especially when they are willing to share that hope with others. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but the greatest wonder of all was the stubborn refusal of thinking beings to accept that freedom was impossible.